Hi there, in this video we're going to build a weather app with React. Here's a demo of how the app looks like. First of all, I can enter a city name here and hit return or enter. Then on the table, I will be able to see a list of locations relevant to the city name. Most importantly, we will be getting back the latitude and longitude because we will be using this to get the actual weather data. Now I can click on the Get Weather button to get the weather data based on the record I selected. Then at the bottom, I can see the weather and temperature data. So I can see that the weather is clear with clear sky as the description. I can also see the temperature data as well. By default, the units of temperature is Kelvin. We can switch the units of temperature by using this component here. So let me switch to Celsius and click on the Get Weather button again. Now the temperature data are displaying in Celsius. So that's the end of the demo. To build this app, we will need to have an account on OpenWeather Map. So if you don't have an account, you can create one for free on this website here. And it is not necessary to provide a credit card when creating the account. By default, we will be given the free plan, which allows us to make 1 million calls per month. Now let's start to build our app. On the terminal, run npx create React app, and we need to give it a name. I'm going to name it Weather App, but you can name it whatever you want. This is going to take some time, so I'm going to speed up the video. Now we can cd into the folder and run npm run start. Then our React app should be running on localhost 3000. Now I will open the app folder with my code editor. Because I'm using VS Code, I can type code space and dot to open the code editor. Now we want to do some cleanup of our files. Open the app.js file. For now, we just want to return a simple hello world text inside the div. And we can remove the unnecessary imports. Now we can delete the app.css file, then delete the app.test.js file, then delete the index.css file. Now open the index.js file. In here, we want to remove the report web vitals, and also remove the import for the index.css file. Now delete the report web vitals.js file, and delete the setup test.js file. Now go back to the terminal and restart the server. Now the hello world text should be displaying on the browser. Now go back to the terminal and shut down the React server, because we want to install a few dependencies. So run npm install axios at mantine/core at mantine/hooks and tabler/icons/react. Axios is a library that can make our life easier when making network requests to the APIs, and the mantine package is a components library that exports things like button, input, table, and more. So we can use these components rather than the default HTML elements. And tabler/icons/react allows us to use tabular icons in our React app. After the dependencies are installed, we can restart the server with npm run start. Now open the app.js file. In here, we want to set up the layout of our app. So import app shell, header, and text from @mantine/core. Then we want to remove the hello world text. Now we want to write our app shell component. We pass in the fixed prop, and we say header is the header component with height of 50 and p equals to md. The p prop is used to add some padding to the header component. Now we pass in the closing tag for the header component. Now we pass in a div with the style prop. Inside the style prop, we say display flex, then align items center. This will help align the items inside the div vertically. Then we say height is 100%. Now we pass in the closing tag for the div element. Now we pass in the text component with the text of weather app. Now we can add the closing tag for the app shell component and save the file. Now our app bar should be displaying on the browser. Now let's display an input component that can be used to enter the city name. Create a folder under the src folder called components and create a new file called weatherapp.js. In this file, we want to import React and useState from React. Then import text input space container text center and box from mantine/core. Then we want to import search from tabler/icons/react. Then write export default function weather app. And for now, we just want to return a div containing the text of weather app and save the file. Now go back to the app.js file, and at the top we want to import weather app from ./components/weather app. Then we want to declare this component under the app shell, so we declare weather app and save the file. Now we should be able to see the weather app text under the navbar. Now we want to update this weather app component to display an input. So go back to the weather app component, and within the component we want to write const value set value to use state, and by default it's an empty string. So this will be used to store the state of the city name. Then we want to remove this div element here and write text input with icon equals to the search component, and sx equals to an empty object with width equals to 500 pixel and max width is 100%. And we say value is equal to value, and on change will be handle change. Then we say placeholder is equal to city name, and we pass in London as the example. Now we can close the component. Now this sexprop is used to define the styling of the root component of this text input. Now we want to declare the handle change function, so we say const handle change, and it will accept e as the param. Then we say set value to e.target.value and save the file. Now I should be able to enter the city name, and the city name is reflected on the input here. Now open the OpenWeatherMap website and click on your username. Then click My API Keys, and we want to copy the API key here. In your case, it's going to be a different value. Then go back to the code editor. At the top, we want to declare a constant called API key, and we can put double quotes here and paste in the API key. Now declaring the API key directly inside the source code is not a good idea during production. When we want to deploy our app to production, we should be storing this API key as an environment variable on the server instead. But for simplicity, we can just put it here for now. However, if you are planning to commit your changes with Git and push your code to places like GitHub or GitLab, remember to remove your API key before doing so. If you accidentally committed your API key, you can deactivate the key and regenerate one easily on the OpenWeather API website. Now we want to integrate with the API by getting a list of geographical coordinates based on the city name, and each of the records in the list will contain the latitude and longitude, which we'll use later. So this is the API that we can use to get the list of geographical coordinates. You can visit this URL here to view this page. As you can see, we need to pass in the query and app ID when using this API. We can pass in limit as well, but it is optional, and by default it's going to be 5. The app ID is simply the API key, and the query can be composed of city name, state code, and country code as stated here. Now we want to update our component to integrate with this API. So go back to the code editor, and at the top we want to import axios from axios. Then we want to create a function called get geocoordinates. And within here we say axios.get. Then we can copy this URL here by using this icon here. Then within the get method call, we pass in backticks and paste in the URL we just copied. Now we need to do some adjustments to this URL here. so that we can pass in our own query. So I will remove the city name, state code, and country code here, and replace it with the value state. And for limit, we can just set it to 5. And app ID will be our own API key. Then we write the then statement. And in here, we will receive the response from the API. For now, let's just log out the response. So console.log rest.data. And for error handling, we can just alert out the error. And we'll receive the error inside the catch statement here. Now we want to wire up our input here to call this function when the user hits enter or return on the keyboard. So create a new function under the geocoordinates function called handle key down, and it will accept e as the param. Then we check if e.key is equal to enter. If it is, we want to run get geocoordinates. Now we need to pass in this handle key down function to the text input. So we say on key down equals to handle key down and save the file. Now we can give this a try on the browser. So I will open the developer tool and go to the network tab and click on fetch or XHR to inspect the API request. So I can enter London here and hit return or enter. Now a network request should be made to the OpenWeather map API, and I'm getting back a list of geographical coordinates. And inside each record, it contains the latitude and longitude. And on the console, I should also be able to see the records. Now let's update our UI to display the records using a table. So inside the weatherapp.js file, we want to import table from mantine core. And we also want to add in state to store the geographical coordinates. So we say const geo coordinates and set geo coordinates equals to use state. And by default, it's just going to be an empty array. Then inside our get geocoordinates function, instead of logging out rest.data, we want to set geocoordinates to rest.data. Now we want to declare the rows function that will be used to render each of the record inside the table. So we say const rows equals to geocoordinates.map. And in here, we pass in a function that has access to each of the record and the index. Then we want to return tr key equals to I. Then within the tr, we say td, and we want to display l.country. Now I'm going to copy this line here and paste it 5 times. And I will update the second td to display l.name, the third td to display l.state, and the fourth td to display l.lab, and the fifth td to display lon. And for the final td, we want to display a button here. So I will remove l.country. Before we declare the button, we need to import it at the top. So import button from @mantine/core. Then go back to the td element. Within here, we say button, and variant is outline, and we can close the button. And within the button, we say get weather. Now we want to declare our table component to use this rows function. So scroll to the bottom, and we want to wrap our text input with a container first. So I will add in container, and I will cut this text input component into the container component. Then under the text input component, I will put in a space component with h equals to lg. So this is just going to put some spacing between our text input and our table component. Now we say table, and within the table we say thead. Then we pass in tr. Then we pass in the th element. Then we pass in country to the th element. Now I'm going to copy the th element and paste it 5 times. And change the second th to name, the third th to state, the fourth th to latitude, the fifth th to longitude. And we can remove the text for the last th. Under the thead component, we want to pass in tbody. Then within the tbody, we pass in rows. Now we can save the file. Now I made a mistake for the rows function. So instead of l.country, this should be g.country. And this applies to rest of the td elements here as well. So I'm going to change this to g dot and save the file again. Now we should also add in a bracket here and move the container component into the bracket and save the file again. Now we should be able to see the input component and the table. Now if I input London and hit return, I should be able to see a list of geographical coordinates. Now we want to display the weather and the temperature data based on the record we selected here. To do this, we need to integrate with another API. So this is the API we want to integrate with. You can view this page by visiting the URL here. To use this API, we need to pass in the latitude and the longitude, and also the API key on the query params. We can also pass in other optional parameters like mode, units, and language. And this is how the API response looks like. Now let's go back to the code editor. In here, we want to write another function called getWeather. So above the getGeoCoordinates function, we write const getWeather, and we will accept latitude and longitude for the params. Then we write axios.get and pass in backticks here. Now I'm going to copy the API URL and paste it here. Now I will update the URL here to send the latitude and longitude received from the params. And I will also change the app ID to API key. Now we write the then statement in which we receive the response. Then for now, we just want to log out the response. So we write console.log rest.data. And for error handling, we can just alert out the error. Now we can save the file. Now we want to wire up the getWeather button to launch the request when we click on it. So go to the roles function. And in here, we want to add in the onClick prop. So we say onClick. Then we pass in the function here. Then we say getWeather. Then we can pass in g.lat and g.lon. Now we can save the file. Now we can give this a try on the browser. So if I click on getWeather, a network request should be launched to the weather API. And I'm getting back a response that looks like this. And if I go to the console tab, I should be able to see the weather data based on the latitude and longitude I passed in. Now let me try out the second record. And another request is made to the backend. And this time I'm getting back the weather data for this second record here. Now we want to display the details of the weather on the UI. So go back to the weather app.js file. In here, we want to add in a new state to store the weather details. So we say const details set details equals to use state now. And inside the getWeather function, we want to update the then statement. So in here we say set details to rest.data. Now we can save the file. Now under the components folder, we want to create a new file called weather details.js. And in here, we write export default function weather details. And it will accept details as the prop. And we want to check if details is provided. If it isn't, we want to return null. But if details is provided, we want to display the weather details using cards. So at the top, we want to import grid, card, text, title, theme icon, and space from at mantine/core. We also want to import mapPin, temperature, and cloud from tabular/icons/react. Now we want to update our return statement. So we say return, and we pass in a bracket here. Then we pass in div. Within the div, we pass in the grid component. And within the grid component, we pass in grid.call. And span will be 6. And within here, we pass in another div element with style of margin, auto. And we pass in our card component here with shadow equals to MD and P equals to LG. The shadow prop is used to specify the box shadow of the card, and P is a prop to define the padding of the card. Within the card component, we pass in a div with style equals to an object, and within here we say display flags and align items center. Within the div, we pass in theme icon with mr, xs, and variant equals to light. And within the theme icon, we pass in map pin. Now under the theme icon, we pass in title with order equals to 3. And we pass in coordinates as the text. Now under this div element, we want to add in a space component with h equals to sm. This is going to create some spacing after the div element here. After the space component, we want to declare a text component. Within here, we say latitude is details dot core dot lat. Now we declare another text component. Within here, we say longitude equals to details dot core dot long. After the text component, we pass in another space component with h equals to lg. Now we can copy this div element here and paste it under the space component. Now we want to change the children of the theme icon to be cloud, and we want to change the title to weather. After the div element, we want to add in another space component where h is sm, and we pass in the text component. Within here, we want to display details.weather, and we want to take out the first element, and we want to display the main field. Now we can copy this text component and paste it, then change the main field to description. We also want to add in a prop to the second text component, so we add in size equal to sm. Now we can save the file. Now we want to update the weather app.js file to use this weather details component. So go to the file and import weather details from /weather details. And we want to declare this component in the return statement. So we can declare it after the table component. We also need to pass in the details prop. Now save the file. Now I made a mistake on the weather details.js file. So if the details doesn't exist, we should then return null, or else we will return the card component. So I will fix this and save the file. Now we can give this a try on the browser. So if I click on get weather on the first record, it should display the latitude and longitude of the selected record. It should also display the weather data. So for the given latitude and longitude, the weather is clouds with the description of broken clouds. Now let's add in another card to display the temperature. So on the weather details.js file, I will copy the entire grid.call component and paste it. And I will remove this div here that contains the weather title. I will also remove the space components here and also the text components here. Now I will update the title to main. Then I will update the first text component to temperature. And we want to display details.main.temp. And for the second text component, we want to display feels like, and we will change this to details.main.feels_like. Now I will copy this text component and paste it 4 times. Then I will change the third text component to display temperature mean, and I will change the feels like field to temp_mean. And for the fourth element, we want to display temperature max. Then we want to change the feels like field to temp_max. For the fifth component, we want to display pressure, and we want to change feels like to pressure. And for the final text component, we want to display humidity, and we can change feels like to humidity. Now save the file, and we should be able to see the temperature data on the second card. Now let's add some spacing above these 2 cards component. So go to the weather app.js file, and before we render the weather details component, we want to add space where the h-prop is md. Now save the file, and we should have some spacing above the cards component. Currently our temperature are displaying in Kelvin, which might not be what the user wants. So we want to update our app to allow users to select the units of measurement they want when requesting the weather. We can do this by using the segmented control component available from mantine. Now we want to update our weather app.js file to store the state of units of measurement. So inside the component, write const units set units to use state, and by default it's going to be standard. And we want to update our getWeather function to include in n units equals to units. Now we want to update our import statement to include segmented control from mantine. Now we can define this segmented control component. So go to the return statement. Now we want to add in a div element under the container. So we say div and style is equal to an object where display is flags and align items is center. Within the div element, we pass in a text component where mr is xs, and within here we say units : Now we pass in the segmented control, and we say value is units, on change is set units. Then data is an array that contains 3 objects. Inside the first object, we say value is standard, and label will be a center component containing a box component, and within here we say Kelvin. Now we can copy the value field and the label field and paste it into the second object, and change the value to metric, and change the text inside the box to Celsius. Now paste the code into the third object, and we change the value to imperial, and inside the box we change the text to Fahrenheit. And we can now close the segmented control component. And under the div we want to add in some spacing, so we say space, and h is equal to lg. Now we can save the file, and our component should be displaying on the browser. Now we want to pass in the units into the details component. So go to the details component, and in here we say units is equal to units. Then save the file again, and go to the weather details.js file. In here we want to accept units, and add in a function called render temperature, and it will receive value. So this function is going to render our value with the correct symbol based on the units we selected. So we check if units is equal to metric. So if the units is equal to metric, we want to return value, then /u 00b0c. So this /u 00b0 is just used to display the symbol we usually see on Celsius or Fahrenheit. Now we check if units is equal to imperial. If it is, we want to return the value, and we pass in /u 00b0f, and by default we want to return value /u 212a. So this is used to display the K symbol, which represents the Kelvin unit. Now we want to update our temperature text to use this function here to render the temperature. So scroll to the component where we display the temperature. And I'm going to update these 4 text components to use the render temperature function. Now I will save the file. Now we can give this a try on the browser. So if I select Celsius, and I enter London and hit return, then I want to get the weather of the first record. This time I'm getting back the weather data in Celsius. Currently we're having a bug where we are displaying the units of measurement when we change the units immediately. So if I select the Celsius and click get weather, I will get back the weather data in Celsius. But if I change the units of measurement to Fahrenheit, the symbols are updated directly, but the weather data itself is still using the old units of measurement. To resolve this, we can introduce another state to be used by the details component, and we will only update this state after we have retrieved the weather details. So inside the weather app.js file, we want to add in a new state to store the units of measurement used by the details component. So we say const units use set units use equals to use state, and by default it's going to be standard. Now inside the getWeather function, And inside the then statement, we want to run set units use to units. And instead of passing the units state to the details component, we want to pass in units use. Now save the file. Now we can test this out on the browser. So I will select Celsius as the units, and I will search for London and click on the Get Weather button of the first record. Now the weather data are displaying in Celsius, and if I change the units of measurement to Fahrenheit, it doesn't change the symbol immediately on the details component. Now if I click on the Get Weather button, it's going to display the data with the correct symbol. Our weather app is almost completed. Now let's update this icon here to a different icon. So go to the weather details.js file, and we want to use this temperature icon here. So scroll to the component, and instead of mapping, I'm going to change this to temperature, and save the file. Now it's displaying the temperature icon. Let's also update this details component to be responsive. So on smaller screens, we are going to display one card per row. To do this, go to the first grid.co component, and instead of span equals to 6, we are going to change this to md equals to 6 and sn equals to 12, and we are going to use these props on the second grid column as well. Now save the file, and our changes should be reflected. So on bigger screens, I should see 2 cards per row, but on smaller screens, I should see 1 card per row. Now let's update the card to display an icon based on the weather. When we retrieve the weather details from the API, we'll receive an icon code, and we can use the code to request for an icon image from OpenWeather map. In here, I can see a list of icons based on the code passed in. So 01D corresponds to this icon here, while 02D corresponds to this icon here. Inside the weather details.js file, we want to add in a div above the weather main text component. So we say div style is equal to an object where display is flex. And within the div, we pass in image, and we want to say source is backticks. Now we can copy this URL here, then we can pass in the URL. Now we want to change the icon here to details.weather, and we take out the first element, and we say .icon. Now the add 2 times here simply indicates that we want a bigger icon, but in our case, we don't need a bigger icon. Now we say style, and within here we say margin right, 8 pixel. Now we can close the image element, and we pass in another div here. Now we can cut these 2 text components into the div element and save the file. Now I can click on Get Weather on these different records here to check out different icons based on the weather condition. So there you have it, our weather app is completed. There are a lot of other APIs available on OpenWeather Map. You can view this page to learn more about it, and maybe improve your app by integrating with some other APIs listed here. If you enjoy the content, please leave a like and subscribe for more content like this in the future. Thank you for watching.